Yeah. Anyways, welcome to the Soul Tapes podcast. My name is Adam Cruz.
My name is Antonio Reyes.
And we are excited today to jump back into a conversation. I've been thinking a lot about the idea of failure, right? I think 2020 for a lot of people might feel like there's a lot of failure going on, right? Because failure, and I'm just like jumping right in, just kind of thinking about this. It's like, failure a lot of times happens either from a lack of us, engaging and doing something, or unforeseen circumstances that could come that are out of our control, right? So this year, a lot of unforeseen circumstances have happened to a lot of people, right? That might cause them to feel like they failed, like they, weren't able to accomplish their goals. And I just feel like that's something that's, a good conversation that we can have when we think about just the mindset of where we can kind of go with in our relationship with failure and trying to strive and succeed in so many areas of our life. But I think it's something we can kind of talk about, what does failure look like? What does failure look like to you? What does failure look like, or has looked like in the past, right? And how do we move forward, or how do we continue to rise through adversity and things like that?
Yeah, I think that's a great conversation, because I think we live in a time where, and I always hear this, the failure doesn't exist. Like, you learn from, if you learn anything or you learn a little bit, it wasn't a failure. Yeah. But I think that I get it. I get that comment. But I feel like we diminish, the circumstances around us, that we didn't accomplish something, maybe, we didn't get what we expected, perhaps. And that's a reality. You can't tell me, even though I learned something, it doesn't mean that I accomplished what I wanted. So I think that just to begin with, for me, many times failure looks like not being able to accomplish certain things, not being able to reach the goals that I had. And that can feel very frustrated. Yeah. Because I feel like many times what failure does is that I feel like it attacks your identity. I think that many times failure can be a loud voice that attacks who you are, saying, are you really who you think you are, because maybe it can be in business, it can be in school, it can be in any project that you do, right? And if you're doing those projects, those businesses, anything in school, out of who you think you are, right? Out of your strengths, and if it doesn't work, then you question, then am I really that person who I think I am? Do I really have those strengths? Do I really have those attributes? Yeah. That makes sense? Then I feel like many times what failure does is it comes and attacks your identity. And that's when we need to start be careful. We need to be careful with that.
Yeah, and I think failure, in the definition of just kind of what it means, isn't something that I think we have like a fear or like a anxiety around failure, and like we don't want to use that word when we think about the things that we're working on or trying to accomplish. But the reality is that if you understand that the way I look at it when I think about how I define failure on a daily basis is, there's days when I wake up and I have, a to-do list, things that I want to accomplish for the day. Yeah. And, to me, not getting to all of the things on my to-do list doesn't necessarily make me feel like I failed. What I feel when I think about failure on a daily basis is if I completely disregard all the responsibilities that I have. Like, let's say, I wake up and I have, I need to do the laundry. I need to, do homework. I need to go grocery shopping, just kind of like a errands day, something like that. But instead, instead of doing all those things, I choose to kind of stay home and just kind of waste my day away. To me, at the end of the day, if I didn't accomplish not one of those things, then I would feel like I failed that day.
Yeah.
Because, there was responsibilities that I had to accomplish and things. Now, granted, there's days where, you're exhausted, you need rest, and you need to, kind of recoup. That's different. That's different when it becomes a rest day. There's things that you have time to kind of push back. But if it's just wasting the day for the sake of wasting the day, then I would say for me, then that was kind of a failure for me.
Yeah.
Now, what I would say, well, and I don't know, maybe do you have what does that look like for you? What do you feel like when you think of when you failed for a day? And again, not making you feel like, oh my gosh, the worst person in the world, but just looking back and saying, man, I really kind of dropped the ball today,
So one of my struggles many times can be that I know that I have certain responsibilities and I push them back. I keep pushing them and pushing them out, and I don't tackle them. So if I finish my day many times and I knew that I had to call someone or text someone or tackle certain things, my responsibilities during the day, I feel like that makes me feel a little bit like, man, I just failed. Like, why do I keep doing this?
Yeah.
So in my basic everyday life, I feel like that's one of the things that I battle everything, every single day. And I try to like get out of the house so that I can accomplish things. Because if I stay at home, I feel like I get comfortable and I end up doing nothing. Yeah. So that's why I like to go to coffee shops, because that makes me feel like I'm in a place where I need to accomplish certain things in 4 hours, 3 hours, right? And that's the way I push myself. But there's days that I'm like here and I'm like, oh man, like I don't want to do anything, and I end up not doing anything. Yeah. And that's when I'm like, I feel unproductive and I feel like I waste my day and not doing anything.
Yeah. And and I like that. I like the finding spaces for you to be productive, finding space, because it's true, when we get into these comfortable spaces, being home, it's easy to just let time pass, right? But I think there's a difference between, not accomplishing certain tasks for the day and just kind of the whole simple definition of failure versus living with a mindset of failure, right? Yeah. And I think that's where we get people having this kind of negative, stigma of where this mentality of failure is really where, to me, the danger is when it comes to, making sure that we don't kind of continue in that thought pattern. Because I think when you have those days like what you're describing, and we can all relate to that struggle, right? Of, I need to do this, I need to do that, and kind of pushing it back. That can be something that we can work on, and it's okay. But like you mentioned, it doesn't, you don't want that to define your identity, right? You don't want that to become something where you say, man, I'm such a horrible person, I'm a horrible leader, I'm a horrible worker, I'm a horrible, husband, I'm a horrible friend because I didn't do these things, right? Like, you don't want that to become, something that you put over yourself, right?
Yeah.
Because that's where it becomes this mentality where you're living your life walking out with this expectation that I'm going to fail because I'm mentally already there, right?
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that I kind of learned through this process, because if you're just like me, I tend to be very harsh with myself.
Yeah.
Very, very harsh. I never feel like I did enough. I never feel like if something doesn't go the way I want it to, that's a reason to criticize myself. See, I told you should have done that. Yeah. See, you didn't do that. So and so on. So I think that in this process, we have to give ourselves grace, right? Yeah. Pretty much what it means is that you give yourself a space of like, man, you can do better. Yes. Yeah. It's okay. And I think that's something that we sometimes don't allow ourselves to give ourselves, right? Yeah. But that doesn't. It's not a pass to say, "Oh, keep doing what you're doing." No, it's just a pass to say, "Look, I know I can do better, and I'm gonna get rid of this feelings of guilt, and shame that I didn't do enough, and I'm just gonna give myself grace as I keep moving forward.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah, I feel like I got the image as you were talking of, it's funny that when we're, when you think about a baby or a child, I thought about like a baby like learning to walk, right? Like a baby learning to walk is constantly failing, constantly falling,
Yes.
constantly, trying to, grow the muscles to be able to stand up and have the strength on their legs to be able to continue to walk, right? And if you notice, like with a child, like they don't have this mentality of failure so deeply ingrained in their mind because they're not immediately defeated the first day saying, I can't do this. They're not immediately defeated a week later saying, I can't do this. Like, and if you notice, usually you have affirming parents or aunts and uncles and cousins and whatever, like people constantly, encouraging them. Come on, you can do it. Like, right. Giving them that encouragement. But something happens when we get older and we find ourselves in spaces where, you have this expectation upon yourself where people are like, come on, man, like you should know better by now. Like you're an adult now. Like we get into this space where things change, where it's no longer, hey, it's okay, man, you got this. I know you failed, but you know what? Don't worry about it. Like there's another day, right? We get into this space where it's like, no, like it's not okay anymore. It's not, you don't have permission to fail.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we have this pressure and, that we feel like, man, there's no more space and no more room in life to fail. And I think that's where that anxiety and stress comes in, where we tend to struggle. And I know that a lot of times it comes from our own pressures, right? Like you say, like putting these expectations upon ourselves, which in some sense is good, but I think we have to be careful that we don't, get into that unhealthy space where it's constantly no grace, constantly no room for error, no room for those things, right?
And I think some things would take longer than others. Like,
yes.
What I mean by that is some quote unquote failures would take longer to heal than others, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I can give you a clear example, being completely honest. When we finish, we didn't finish, but we transitioned from church planning to become part of a bigger church, right? For a long time, for months, I battled with the feelings of like I failed, like I didn't do enough, It was not productive. It didn't grow. I mean, I maintain certain standard. And I think it was until I sit down, and I still struggle after that, but I think it brought peace to my life, until I brought it to one of my mentors and my boss. And I was like, this is how I feel. This is what I'm going through. And he just gave me a whole different perspective to see it from a different angle that helped me be at peace. Like, okay, like, I understand. Like now I get it from a different perspective, right? So I think we have to get out of our own thoughts and get out of our own feelings and allow someone else to speak into our lives. What do you think? Healthy voices, not just any voices. Healthy voices that you trust, that will tell you the truth, but at the same time they're honest enough to tell you, look, like, you might feel that way, but look at all the things that you accomplished, right? So I think that I know they always default to like, hey, like you need mentors, you need voices, but you do, because in moments like this, sometimes the only way to get out is someone else pulling you out. And some things would take longer. Once again, some things would take longer to heal. Some failures would take longer to heal, from a day to day to projects, to different things you want to do. And you have to be okay with that. But don't like,
well, I think there's a difference between failure and a season in our life ending. So I think as we start to kind of unpack or think about our past, right? Think about things that we've gone through. Some of the times we can land there, right? Thinking like, oh, that was such a failure. I didn't accomplish the level of growth that I was desiring. So I think about my life and think about, being a kid and dreaming about being in the NFL, like thinking about like desiring to play football, and all I did like growing up was play football. And that was my first dream growing up, was like, man, like God, I could just like I would love to travel, like play and like, you know, just get paid to play football. Wouldn't that be awesome? And granted, you know, I was never big enough, never tall enough, never, you know, skilled enough to do those things, right? But, you know, I always think about, you know, my mind always goes to places like, what would happen if that dream came true?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
like what would my life look like if that happened now? Maybe it would be amazing and awesome. Right. But I think that when we kind of like think about our life and then bring in this idea that God has a plan for our lives, I think we start to think about failure differently.
Yeah.
Because it can be easy to be hard on ourselves and say, man, I had a dream to become, you know, go to the NFL, and right in high school, starting to, you know, try out for football, and I immediately give up, you know. I could have been hard on myself and said, wow, like you didn't even try, you know, first step, and you just like, you know, let it go. But I think it was not necessarily, I think sometimes God allows certain dreams in our life to die.
Yeah.
That we have to allow these dreams in our life. Sometimes, and I've heard of this concept in the sense of like when you achieve a dream, it dies.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's not even possible, right? Because I know if you're anything like us, like we have so many dreams, right? We've had multiple dreams where we're like, no, these things are never gonna happen. And when we finally come to a place of acceptance of, hey, I understand that this dream that I had has to die, and it's okay because in that process you're able to pivot into the next phase of your life or the direction that God is asking you to go in, right?
Yeah. That's so good, because then you learn how to let go, right? And then obviously the God is not gonna waste anything in your life.
Yeah.
That's so true, you know, because if we keep stuck to the idea of like, but I wanted that. It's like a little kid, right? Oh, but I wanted that.
Yeah.
But there's something better. No, but I want it.
Yeah.
That's what I want.
Yeah.
And I think that we can get stuck there, and that's so true, you know, like the idea of like, if we believe this idea of that God is orchestrating things in our behalf, you know, and it might look different, but it will satisfy our soul.
Yeah.
You know, because I think many times when we hear this idea that God has a plan for us, right, we feel like God is trying to sabotage our lives, taking away what we really want and giving us what he wants.
Yeah.
And it's like we see it from the wrong perspective, because the plan of God for us is to give us what our heart really desires. And then that might evolve and grow in the future, like as you keep moving forward in life.
Yeah.
But it's true, you know, like if a season ends, we have to learn how to let go and open our hands, so that we can receive the next thing, right? And maybe it's got God saving us from something that is probably gonna be what we don't expect in the future, right?
Yeah. I always get the image of, I don't know if you've seen that meme or picture on Instagram, where it's the guy like underground, like chiseling away at the dirt, and then it's like right on the other side of where he stops is like him achieving his goal and his dream. And so I always get that image in my mind where I think where we get this thought of, man, I can't stop, because what if I'm that close, right? What if I'm that close to success? What if I'm that close to reaching my dream if I just keep going? And I think to a certain extent that there's a lot of truth to that, right? Like, you know, I do believe that there is the difference between people being successful in something and not is that people give up. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
Is that there's this idea of giving up, that there's these stories that we see of people that we're so moved by because they were able and willing to face the adversity, willing to go through that process and that journey. And I think sometimes we have to be realistic with ourselves and say, okay, like, you know, maybe it's not that I'm giving up, but I have to be honest about kind of realistically seeing where I'm at, what I'm searching for, and what are my true goals, right? What am I truly seeking out to desire, and what is that going to take for me to get there?
And you and I have this conversation before. We ask the tough questions. Do you see yourself doing this for a long time, right? Do you see yourself doing this for the next 10 years? What happens if it doesn't happen, right? And I think that's honest questions. Like, if we living in this Disney world where we don't ask those tough questions, it's gonna feel worse. You know, as we are actually being honest with ourselves and saying, look, Yeah, that I don't think, because when I was I stopped pursuing my dream of being a soccer player when I was 19.
Yeah.
And some people say, well, you're young. No, not really. Like at that
Yeah.
time, like at that point, I knew that
Yeah.
that was not gonna be something for me, and I had to be okay with that. And the reality is that, thank God, he came into the picture.
Yeah.
It gave me a whole nother future that I never dreamed of having, right? So the reality is that it was hard for me to let go of that. But now, like and if I was 18, if you would ask me, do you see yourself without soccer in your life? I would tell you no, because soccer gave me a lot, from relationships to certain a drive to do something in my life, to like my life was surrounded by people, and by I was getting paid when I was 16 playing soccer. So at the end of the day, like now I see my life backwards. I'm like, dang, like thank God that I got out of that dream, because now I have friends that are 30, 35, and they still, like, that's their world. And it's like, I don't have nothing against it, but it's like there's so much more outside. Yeah,
and I think that there's a lot of connections to those early dreams that I think if we start to really unpack them, we'll see that what you're doing now is probably not far off from what you truly enjoyed and gained from that first dream, right? So like I think about like soccer, football. For me, it's like there was this desire or some sort of enjoyment in performing in front of people, right? So for me, like with music, or even speaking and doing things like that, there's this thing of being in front of a crowd and being able to perform, and then to show skill, and to show, have a connection with a team, right? To be able to collaborate, to be able to do something, just different, right? I think we're able to kind of do those things, but one of the things that I was thinking about was this idea of failing forward, right? And this kind of phrasing of not just simply looking at our failures as allowing them to bring us down, but how can we take these failures and actually allow them to propel us forward? So when I think about this concept, I think about, I've been doing music for 12 years now, since I was 16. Writing, recording, producing music, now, with clothing and doing all these things, right? I've been doing it for a long time. And, when I think about all the years that have passed, I could think about all the failures that have happened, all the mistakes that have been made, all the things I didn't accomplish, right? And to me, failing forward to me is like looking back at all these years, and taking the things that I did wrong and trying to kind of shift and change and grow, and not continue to do the same thing over and over again. I think that's what's different with when you're just constantly failing at something and refusing to innovate. Yeah. And that's, to me, the difference when it comes to those that are able to be successful, because they're able to shift.
Yeah, because I think you need to look at your patterns, right?
Yeah.
Those patterns would tell you, hey, like, am I doing this right, or am I doing this wrong? And if you look back, you need to pay attention to those things.
Yeah.
Because if you keep failing, right, what is the pattern behind that? And maybe you can actually learn and restructure your patterns so that you can no longer fail in the same place, right? And I think that that's so key, because then you have to be very, you need to be very conscious about those decisions and the way you move, right, in the way you navigate life, so that you no longer keep making the same mistakes. If you're gonna make a mistake, you're gonna make a mistake differently, and not there, right?
Yeah.
So I think that for us, for Gavin, for myself, we're exploring some new options, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been wanting to do is sit down. Let's sit down and let's talk about the things that we have done.
Yeah.
And let's scratch the things that we did wrong, or the things that we lacked, and let's see how can we improve those things, and let's keep doing the things that we did right, so that we can. So if we take this new opportunity, we can be more effective. But that requires for us to sit down, because if we don't evaluate and look at our past or the past decisions that we make, we are gonna keep making the same mistake. So that's no longer I feel like an excuse. Well, I'm failing because of whatever you blame an outside reason, right? Now you have to take responsibility for your choices all the time, so that you can actually be improve and evolve.
Yeah, and I think that's really awesome, that whole framework and mindset of being able to kind of have a meeting, like having a meeting like that with your wife and saying like, hey, let's look back. Let's be honest about the things that we did wrong. Let's try to look at the things we did right to move forward. Because I think a common misconception that people have with people that are successful is they think that, oh, everything just fell in line for them. They got lucky, that they, it was because of their family that they came from, that they were able to achieve this. Oh, they were, given something that I could never be, never have. So we think about all these factors that, we want to believe so bad that success in life and being in the ability to achieve something just comes because someone dropped it in our hands, right? But the reality is, I think that those that are very successful in life are able to do exactly what you're saying. They're able to be honest about the areas that they made mistakes, be honest about the fact that, hey, there were some things that I did wrong, and how do we adjust? How do we move forward? How do we innovate? How do we find a creative way to do that? How do we find a creative way to achieve that? That's what it takes, right? It takes us being able to be accepting of the fact that if we're honest, we haven't done everything right, and that we should all be okay with that, because that's just the truth that we're learning through this process of life. Just again, going back to the analogy of a child versus us being an adult now, I think that's something that is really important today that people need to really understand, is that just because you're in your 20s, just because you're in your 30s, it doesn't matter what age you find yourself in, that you're still in this process of learning. You're still in this process of growing, of trying to figure out how to do life. And I think we need to give, and that's why to me this whole concept of grace is so good, but I feel like we suck at giving it out to people.
That's so good.
Because we want to believe that God has grace for us, but then we don't really believe that God has grace for you. I can't give you the grace, because that's not right. Like you're a man, like you're an adult, you're almost 30 years old, like you should know what you're doing. But the reality is sometimes that when we've had conversation, we could be honest. Sometimes we don't know what we're doing. You know?
Of course.
So anyway.
No. You're right. Like I think that that's part of the process. Like piggyback of the idea that we don't give grace. Like I think that unfortunately many times the person that I give less grace to is my wife.
Yeah.
But going back to me, like I do feel like many times what end up happening is going back to the idea of taking responsibility, right?
Yeah.
And before we live a life that is an introspective, right, where we are constantly seeing our lives, where we see our brokenness before we see someone else's brokenness, where we see our inconsistencies before we see someone else's inconsistencies. I think that should create in us empathy and should we extend grace, right?
Yeah.
I think that that's so key, because we constantly live like in this outside, like everything around us, right? Instead of like really looking at us, right? I remember hearing someone speaking about like when we point someone, remember you have three fingers pointing at yourself, right? Yeah. And that's the reality of it, right? At the end of the day, we have to be able to live in introspective so that we can extend grace to people. So yeah, man. Yeah,
and I think we can't be intimidated by other people's success.
Yeah, always.
I think that
our insecurities come to surface.
Exactly. Yeah, it definitely points back to just the insecurities that we have. But I think, again, it goes back to taking ownership in our own lives. Sometimes I think we don't realize how powerful, like, the gifts that God has given us, even just with our mindset, our brains, like our mental capacity, like the fact that like when we really put ourselves and our efforts forward, we can achieve and accomplish great things.
Completely.
But I just think that at the end of the day, we that's where comparison, just like, we have to get away from that, because I think that when we realize that the greatest asset in this world is people and relationships.
Yep.
Any business person will tell you that it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. And even more so today, that's so much more important because of our ability to connect with each other. So I think that we have to value relationships and be willing to learn from those around us. And I think that's where, for maybe those out there that struggle with failure, struggle with insecurities and anxieties, I think one of the biggest things, or my biggest piece of advice, is get out of your own head and start asking more questions to people around you. Look up to those that are in places or have things that you're desiring, and be willing and humble enough to ask questions. How did you get there? How did you achieve that? Hey, if you can be honest, look into my life. Where are areas you see that I need to improve? Because I know sometimes we struggle with seeing the blind spots in our life as well.
Yeah, and I think that's so good, because we really do. I think if more people, young adults, let's just talk about young adults, people in their 30s and 20s, right? If more people in their 20s and 30s would actually be humble enough to ask, hey, can you speak into my life, and can you tell me where are my inconsistencies? Dude, we will grow so much, but because we live in a time where we know it all, we have access to information, we have access to everything, we have lost that, and we have lost the opportunity to ask wisdom from people, and perspective from people. So that's true. I think we should do that. And I think my closing thought is, when it comes down to this, is we failing forward. My desire, I think for me, obviously my faith plays a huge piece in this whole thing, and is being hopeful. That God is already orchestrating and arranging something around, like ahead of me, that I just have to be faithful enough to do what I have to do in this time, and that in His moment the next thing will come. Even if I feel like I wasn't productive in a place, or I wasn't fruitful in a place, knowing that if I'd give my all and I give my heart to it, and if it didn't work, God is setting me up for something else. And that He's gonna orchestrate, and it might not look the way I want to, but that's okay. Being willing to embrace that in my life, to me, that's so key.
The journeys of life, right? The ups and downs, I think that's a beautiful part about life, is that we see it as like this one-way street with maybe a few stops along the way. But the reality is, like, to me, life is really like a roller coaster ride sometimes, right? It's ups and downs, it's circles, it's amazing views and awesome moments. But sometimes it's a little shaky. Sometimes things happen that you don't expect. But I think it's funny that we have this conversation around failure. But I think, to me, my biggest thought is leaving with this idea of grace, and just thinking that, in this season, in this year 2020, I think that's what we should be left with at the end of the day right now, is give yourself grace in this season. That's something I know I've done a lot of, is like, hey, I've really checked myself in the sense of I've had such a desire to produce and be productive, but just giving myself grace in this season, saying, hey, some days are going to look like a failure. Some days I didn't do what I wanted to do, but I am not a failure. And I think that's what I want people to hear, is that you are not a failure. You are not the mistakes that you've made, and that today, if you have breath in your lungs, you have an ability to change the narrative of your own life.
That's so key. I feel like don't allow failure to sneak into your identity. You're amazing, you're wonderful, you're capable, you have the gifts and the attributes, but the reality is that you might, if you allow God to speak into your life, you might be derailed to something else, and that's okay. But it's okay. Like, don't be so obsessed, and don't marry the I remember one of our mentors, he was saying, don't marry the vision, date the vision, marry the mission.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because the vision might change, but the mission stays the same.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, like, marry the mission. What is your mission?
Yeah.
What do you want to do? Help other people, create content, being creative,
Mm-hmm.
The vision might change. The way you would do is different, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
So just don't marry the vision. Just
Mm-hmm.
date it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good, man. Yeah. I love it. I think, you know, this is a necessary just time to just think about these things. And give ourselves the ability to just be flexible, and just to rethink. You know, I like that idea of just getting a picture of your life and the things you've done in the past, and seeing how you can create a better future. So
Love it, man.
yeah,
Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's keep moving forward, family.
awesome. Well, this is the Soul Tapes podcast, and we will see you guys next time.
Let's go. We out.
So that people have the opportunity to change the nation. Hey, but see, God loves this world and every single broken hearted boy and little girl. So if you hate your brother, you also hate your mother, and you hating the creator who made every single other.